Welcome to Money is Freedom, a podcast exploring how finance and freedom connect in our lives. Created from thoughtful research and narrated by Notebook LM.AI, this series brings you clear, meaningful insights into finance and beyond. Welcome to episode 14. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most thought-provoking topics of the year, Peter Thiel's fascinating insights from two standout podcast appearances in 2024. These conversations touch on everything from the rise of counter-elites and U.S. China relations to the transformative potential of artificial intelligence and critiques of higher education. Whether you're a tech enthusiast, a political observer, or just curious about the future, this episode will leave you with plenty to think about. Let's unpack it all.
All right, so let's dive into Peter Thiel.
Yep.
You sent over 2 interviews with him.
Yeah.
One with Barry Weiss, that was back in 2023.
Right.
And then a more recent one from the All In Summit.
Yep.
And, we all know Thiel for that early Facebook investment.
Of course.
And his, shall we say, unique perspective on pretty much everything.
He's definitely doesn't shy away from a hot take.
Not at all.
Nope.
So today we are going to unpack some of Thiel's key ideas.
Okay.
See how his predictions about politics and tech have played out over the past few years.
Sounds good.
It's interesting because back in 2016, Thiel was practically ostracized in Silicon Valley for supporting Trump.
Right.
But now he's got company.
Yeah, he does.
Elon Musk.
Yeah.
David Sachs. Even some former Democrats are kind of echoing his tune.
It's true.
What do you make of this shift?
Well, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Thiel himself points to something called a preference cascade. And it's this idea that when people realize they're not alone in their beliefs, they feel emboldened to speak up.
Oh.
Think of it like you love disco music,
Okay.
but you're too afraid to admit it
Right.
until you stumble into a packed disco party.
Uh-huh.
Suddenly you're busting out your bad moves.
Uh-huh. I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so applied to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Thiel is saying that wokeness reached a point where a lot of tech leaders were already quietly agreeing with parts of Trump's agenda, but were afraid to say so.
That's his take.
Interesting.
He even compares the left to imperial stormtroopers
Wow.
and the right to the ragtag rebel alliance.
A bit dramatic.
Yeah.
But I see his point about feeling stifled in certain circles.
Yeah, for sure.
And this leads into one of Thiel's most provocative claims,
Okay.
that the 2024 election signals a collapse of liberalism.
White.
Whoa, okay.
Okay.
Let's unpack that.
Right.
What does he mean by collapse exactly?
Well,
It's not like liberalism has vanished overnight.
right, it's more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
Thiel believes that the Democratic Party has become this stagnant machine,
Okay.
incapable of self-reflection,
Uh-huh.
and allergic to dissenting voices. He points to the decline of what he calls eccentric thinkers,
Okay.
those who challenge the status quo.
Interesting. You'd think universities, the supposed bastions of intellectual exploration, would be teeming with those types.
You would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But Thiel believes this stifling of intellectual diversity is happening across the board.
Uh-huh.
He argues that the Democrats' reliance on identity politics has also backfired.
How so?
Well, he thinks it failed to resonate with voters beyond their base
Okay.
and even alienated some traditionally Democratic groups, like Jewish and Muslim voters,
Okay.
who didn't feel like their economic concerns were being addressed.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
It's not just about appealing to different identities.
Right.
It's about understanding their unique concerns as well.
Absolutely.
And this kind of brings us to another intriguing twist.
Okay.
Thiel predicted Trump's victory in 2024,
Yeah.
but didn't donate to his campaign.
Right.
So this time around, he seemed hesitant to go all in on Trump.
Uh-huh.
Unlike in 2016.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it's like he's cautiously optimistic,
Yeah,
but not quite ready to jump back on the Trump train completely.
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So does he think Trump has changed? Or is he just hoping for the best?
He seems to believe that the 2020 election was the real anomaly.
Yeah, okay.
A blip in an otherwise predictable trajectory. He sees Trump's 2024 win as a correction,
Right.
a return to a more authentic path for the country.
Okay. So does he think Trump has changed, or is he just hoping for the best?
Thiel does express some concerns about Trump's volatility
Okay.
and tendency to cycle through staff rapidly.
Oh, yeah?
You remember all the drama of the first term?
Oh, I remember. It felt like there was a new scandal every week. Yeah.
But Thiel believes Trump has learned from his mistakes,
Okay.
particularly when it comes to choosing a cabinet.
Okay.
He thinks Trump is now more strategic
Uh-huh.
and will surround himself with people who are truly aligned with his agenda.
Interesting. It's like he's betting on Trump 2.0 being a more polished, less chaotic version.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay, well, speaking of that agenda,
Yes,
one area that always raises eyebrows is Trump's economic policy.
for sure.
The tariffs on Chinese goods, the talk of deporting millions of undocumented immigrants. Some of these ideas are pretty radical,
They are.
even for Thiel, right?
Well, you have to remember that Thiel is a longtime critic of free trade theory.
Okay.
He argues that it's not some universally beneficial system,
Right.
that it's actually hurt certain sectors of the U.S. economy,
Uh-huh.
especially manufacturing.
Okay, so he's saying that while free trade might boost overall GDP,
Right.
it doesn't necessarily benefit everyone equally.
Precisely.
Okay.
And he argues that this focus on aggregate gains
Yeah.
has blinded policymakers to the real pain felt by those who've lost their jobs or seen their wages stagnate.
Okay.
He's particularly concerned about the impact on those key Midwest swing states,
Right.
the ones that ultimately decide elections.
And how does immigration fit into all of this?
Well,
I know Thiel has some unconventional views on that as well.
he does.
Yeah.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Thiel isn't anti-immigration per se,
Okay.
but he's deeply concerned about its economic consequences,
Uh-huh.
especially when it comes to housing.
That seems to be a recurring theme with him,
Yeah.
the impact on housing.
For sure.
What's his take on immigration specifically?
He argues that open borders combined with restrictive housing policies
Right.
create a perfect storm that benefits wealthy landowners at the expense of younger generation
Okay.
and the lower middle class.
I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Yeah.
He's looking at these economic policies through a very specific lens, focusing on how they impact different groups, not just the overall economy.
Right. And he's not just pulling these ideas out of thin air.
Okay.
He actually draws on a somewhat obscure economic theory called Georgism.
Georgism.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm not familiar with that one.
It's named after this 19th century economist named Henry George,
Okay.
who was obsessed with the impact of land ownership on wealth inequality. Thiel sees a lot of parallels between George's ideas and the current situation,
Okay.
where limited housing supply dries up prices
Right.
and benefits a select few.
So it's not just about immigration itself.
Right.
It's about how it interacts with our existing housing policies.
Exactly. And this is where Thiel's perspective differs significantly from the European debate,
Interesting.
which tends to be more focused on cultural concerns surrounding immigration.
Okay.
In the U.S., he argues it's primarily an economic issue.
Okay, I'm following you.
Yeah.
So he's not saying we should close our borders entirely, but he's advocating for a more nuanced approach to immigration that takes into account the potential consequences for housing affordability.
Exactly. He's not offering a simple solution,
Right.
but he's forcing us to think beyond the usual talking points and consider the unintended consequences of these policies,
Yeah.
especially for those who are already struggling.
This is fascinating. He's really challenging a lot of the conventional wisdom around these issues.
He is.
And speaking of challenging conventional wisdom,
Yeah.
we can't talk about Thiel without mentioning his long-standing critique of higher education.
Of course.
He's famously backed the Thiel Fellowship, which encourages students to drop out of college.
Right.
That certainly ruffled some feathers in academia.
It did.
So it's not just about college being expensive.
Right.
It's about whether it's actually providing value for that cost.
Exactly. He believes the student loan debt crisis is a ticking time bomb
Oh, wow.
that will eventually force a radical restructuring of the system. He sees his fellowship as a way to offer an alternative path,
Okay.
one that encourages entrepreneurship and real-world experience over traditional degrees.
It's certainly a provocative approach.
Yeah.
So do you think he's advocating for everyone to drop out of college?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
He's not saying college is inherently bad,
Right.
but he believes it's become far too expensive and that we need to be more critical of its value proposition. He's challenging us to rethink what education should look like in the 21st century
Yeah.
and to be more open to alternative paths to success.
That's a really interesting point. It's like he's saying, don't just blindly follow the traditional path.
Yeah,
Question everything, explore your options, and find what works best for you.
precisely.
And this idea of questioning, of being skeptical,
Right.
is central to Thiel's worldview.
It is.
Okay, tell me more about his view on skepticism.
Well, he sees a dangerous imbalance in our institutions,
Okay.
especially in science, where he argues there's too much emphasis on dogma
Okay.
and not enough room for dissenting voices.
Interesting. He's not saying we should reject science altogether, is he?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
He's just saying that science, like any field, benefits from rigorous debate
Yeah.
and open inquiry.
Okay.
He even draws a comparison to the Catholic Church's resistance to scientific progress centuries ago,
Right.
arguing that we need to be careful not to become too entrenched in our current understanding
Uh-huh.
and to always be open to new ideas,
Yeah.
even if they challenge the status quo.
So it's about finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
between blindly accepting everything we're told
Right.
and falling down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories.
Exactly. It's about approaching everything with a critical eye,
Right.
being willing to ask tough questions, and engaging in civil discourse even when we disagree.
Yeah.
He believes that this kind of intellectual humility is crucial for progress.
This makes me think about how easily labels get thrown around these days.
Yeah.
Populism is one
Yeah, for sure.
that seems particularly charged.
People use it to dismiss certain viewpoints,
Right.
often without really engaging with the substance of those arguments.
It's true.
You're right.
Yeah.
And Thiel is acutely aware of how language can be weaponized to shut down dissent.
For sure.
He actually makes a nuanced distinction between populism and democracy,
Okay.
arguing that the two are often conflated in a way that silences legitimate concerns. So what's his take on the difference?
He believes that true populism is about the people having a genuine voice in shaping their future,
Okay.
while democracy has become a label for a system
Okay.
that often ignores the will of the people in favor of the interests of elites.
So it's not about mob rule or rejecting democratic principles.
Right.
It's about reclaiming the power of the people within a democratic framework.
Exactly. He's calling for a more authentic form of democracy
Yeah.
that's truly responsive to the needs and aspirations of ordinary citizens. And he believes that technology has a role to play in this. Oh, tell me more about how he sees technology fitting into all of this.
Well, he's still a techno-optimist at heart,
Okay.
but he's become increasingly concerned about what he calls technological stagnation.
Okay.
He sees a disconnect between the rapid advancements in the world of bits.
Right.
Think software, the
Yeah.
internet, social media,
Yeah.
and the lack of progress in the world of atoms, the physical world, infrastructure energy.
It's like we've gotten comfortable with the virtual world, the quick wins, and lost sight of the bigger challenges in the real world.
That's a good way to put it. And he links this back to that lack of skepticism we were talking about earlier.
Right.
He argues that we need to be more willing to challenge assumptions, to push boundaries, and to embrace bold solutions if we want to overcome these challenges and create a better future.
He's really painting a picture of a society that's become too risk-averse, too complacent.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here?
That's a great question,
What does he propose as a way forward?
and one we'll delve into further after a quick break.
All right, sounds good.
When we come back, we'll explore Thiel's more specific policy proposals
Okay.
and see what his vision for the future holds.
Awesome, I can't wait.
Stay with us. Welcome back. Before the break, we were discussing Peter Thiel's view that society has become too risk-averse.
Yes, and I'm really curious to hear how he thinks we can overcome this. Does he have any concrete ideas?
Well, he definitely sees individual action as key. He's not a big believer in top-down solutions or waiting for governments to fix things. He thinks too many people have become complacent, expecting someone else to solve the world's problems.
He's definitely a proponent of that pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. But I have to admit, sometimes it feels like the systems in place are designed to keep certain people down.
That's a valid point, and Thiel does acknowledge that institutions can become slow, bureaucratic, even resistant to change. But he still believes that individuals have the power to make a difference, to create new systems, to disrupt the status quo.
That brings us back to his critique of Silicon Valley. He was an early pioneer there, but now he seems disillusioned with its current trajectory.
He argues that it's lost that frontier spirit that made it so dynamic in the early days. Remember the mantra, move fast and break things. It was all about taking risks, challenging conventions, disrupting established industries.
It feels like the energy has shifted. What does he see as the problem now?
He sees a culture of caution, a focus on incremental improvements instead of bold leaps forward. He worries that Silicon Valley has become the very establishment it once rebelled against, more concerned with protecting its own interests than pushing the boundaries of innovation.
So it's become risk-averse, just like the broader society he's critiquing. He seems to see this trend everywhere.
Exactly. He sees it in the education system, the political system, even in the scientific community. It's like we've become afraid to question authority, to challenge conventional wisdom, to explore unconventional ideas.
And that fear, that aversion to failure, ends up stifling creativity and innovation, the very things that drive progress.
Precisely. And this leads us back to his controversial stance on skepticism. He argues that we need more of it, even if it makes people uncomfortable, even if it leads to disagreements and debates.
Because questioning the status quo is often how we uncover new truths, new solutions, and ultimately make progress.
Exactly. He even goes so far as to say that science has become too dogmatic, too quick to dismiss dissenting voices or alternative theories. He worries that important questions are being shut down simply because they threaten the prevailing narratives.
That's a pretty bold claim, but I see what he's getting at. There's a difference between healthy skepticism and falling down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories.
Absolutely. And Thiel acknowledges that skepticism can be taken too far, leading to denialism and a rejection of evidence-based reasoning.
Right.
But he's more concerned with the opposite problem, that we've become too quick to dismiss anything that challenges the mainstream view, too reliant on experts who may have their own biases and agendas.
It's about finding that balance, encouraging critical thinking, engaging with different perspectives, even if they make us uncomfortable, but also grounding ourselves in evidence and logic.
Exactly. It's about having those difficult conversations, not shying away from them, and being willing to change our minds when presented with new information.
This makes me think about his idea of the collapse of liberalism. Is it possible that this intellectual stagnation, this unwillingness to engage in open debate, is part of what he's getting at?
I think that's a very astute observation. He's not just talking about policy differences. He's talking about a deeper intellectual crisis, a failure of imagination, and a reluctance to grapple with complex issues.
So when he critiques the Democratic Party, it's not just about their specific policies. It's about their approach to problem-solving, their way of thinking.
Exactly. He sees them as trapped in a cycle of virtue signaling and identity politics, more concerned with appearing morally righteous than with actually addressing the material concerns of everyday Americans.
Which is perhaps why he was drawn to Trump's message, despite its often flawed delivery and divisive rhetoric.
Trump tapped into that sense of frustration, that feeling that the system was rigged against them, that their voices weren't being heard. And Thiel, despite his own reservations about Trump's personality and style, saw him as a disruptor, someone who could shake things up and force a much-needed conversation.
It seems like he was willing to overlook Trump's flaws because he saw him as a necessary catalyst for change.
That's a good way to put it. Whether that disruption ultimately proves to be positive or negative is still an open question.
It's certainly a gamble betting on someone like Trump to bring about positive change, but it speaks to Thiel's willingness to take risks, to bet on the outsider, even if it means going against the grain.
That's consistent with his overall philosophy. He's drawn to those who challenge the status quo, who think differently, who are willing to push boundaries.
And he sees that spirit as essential for tackling the complex challenges facing our world. From economic stagnation to technological disruption, we need bold thinkers and bold action.
He doesn't want us to be passive observers. He wants us to engage, to question, to shape the future.
And he's certainly not afraid to ruffle some feathers along the way, whether you agree with him or not. Thiel is a fascinating figure, someone who forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our world.
Absolutely. He's a provocateur, a contrarian, and a visionary all rolled into one. And ultimately, that's what makes his ideas so worth grappling with.
He's not giving us easy answers. He's challenging us to think deeper, to question our assumptions, and to consider different perspectives.
And that's what this deep dive is all about. It's not about providing definitive answers. It's about giving you, the listener, the tools to engage in these conversations and form your own conclusions.
Okay, well, I'm definitely feeling intellectually stimulated before we wrap up. I'm really curious to hear more about Thiel's specific policy proposals, especially in light of his critique of free trade and his concerns about the economic impact of immigration.
Let's dive into those details now.
Okay, so we've explored Thiel's critique of Silicon Valley, his skepticism towards higher education, and his unconventional views on immigration and free trade.
A lot to unpack there.
But what does he actually propose as an alternative? What are some of his specific policy ideas?
Well, he's not someone who lays out detailed policy blueprints.
Okay.
He's more of a big picture thinker.
Right.
A philosopher king, if you will.
Okay.
But we can glean some insights from his writings and interviews.
Right.
One area where he's been particularly vocal is trade policy.
Okay, and we talked earlier about his critique of free trade and how he thinks it's hurt certain sectors of the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
So what does he propose instead?
Well, He's not advocating for complete isolationism or a return to pure protectionism.
Right.
But he believes that the U.S. needs to be more strategic in its trade relationships, particularly with China.
Okay.
He sees the massive trade deficit as a symptom of a system that's become unbalanced, benefiting certain sectors like finance at the expense of manufacturing and those crucial blue-collar jobs.
So the tariffs that Trump imposed on Chinese goods were a step in the right direction in his view.
He seems to think so.
Okay.
He sees them as a way to rebalance the playing field,
Uh-huh.
even if it means higher prices for consumers in the short term.
Okay.
He argues that the long-term benefits of a more robust domestic manufacturing base outweigh the temporary costs.
That's an interesting perspective. It challenges the conventional wisdom that free trade always benefits everyone.
Yeah.
He seems to be focused on the distributional effects, on who wins and who loses in these global economic arrangements.
Exactly. He's not just looking at the aggregate numbers.
Right.
He's looking at the impact on specific communities and industries.
Okay.
And he believes that policymakers need to be more attentive to these distributional concerns.
Yeah.
Even if it means deviating from the pure free trade orthodoxy.
And this ties into his views on immigration as well, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about the overall economic impact, but about how those impacts are distributed across different groups.
Precisely, he argues that open borders coupled with restrictive housing policies in many parts of the U.S. Create a situation where immigration primarily benefits wealthy landowners and employers, while putting downward pressure on wages and driving up housing costs for everyone else.
So it's not immigration itself that he objects to?
Right.
But the way it interacts with our existing economic and social policies.
Exactly. He believes we need a more nuanced approach to immigration.
Okay.
One that takes into account these distributional effects
Right.
and ensures that it benefits a broader swath of society,
Yeah.
not just a select few.
That makes sense. He's not advocating for closed borders, but for a more managed approach that aligns with broader economic goals.
Yeah.
I'm sensing a theme here.
What's that?
He's really pushing back against this idea that there are these universal economic laws that dictate policy.
Yeah.
He's saying, let's look at the specifics, let's see who's actually benefiting, and let's craft policies that serve the interests of a broader segment of society.
You've hit the nail on the head. He's challenging the technocratic top-down approach to economic policy that's dominated for decades.
Yeah.
He's calling for a more bottom-up approach.
Yeah.
One that's grounded in the real-world experiences of people and communities.
This makes me think about his interest in Georgism that we talked about earlier. This idea that land ownership plays a crucial role in wealth inequality.
Right.
How does that fit into his policy thinking?
It's central to his critique of the current system. He sees the rising cost of housing as a symptom of a deeper problem. The concentration of land ownership in the hands of a few.
Okay.
He believes that we need to rethink our approach to land use and zoning regulations if we want to create a more equitable society.
So instead of just focusing on things like taxes and welfare programs, he's saying we need to address the underlying structures that generate inequality in the first place.
That's exactly right. He's looking beyond the usual left-right debates about redistribution and focusing on the systemic issues that create those imbalances in the first place.
This is really thought-provoking stuff.
It is.
It's a very different way of thinking about economic policy.
Yeah, it is.
But where does technology fit into all of this?
Wow.
He's obviously a big believer in the power of technology to transform the world.
He is, but he's also become more cautious. Even critical of certain aspects of the tech industry. He worries that we've become too obsessed with the world of bits.
Right.
The virtual realm of software, social media, and digital distractions.
Yeah.
At the expense of the world of atoms.
Right.
The physical world of infrastructure manufacturing and energy production.
So he's not a Luddite who wants to reject technology altogether.
Oh, not at all.
He just thinks we need to be more mindful of its impact and ensure that it serves human flourishing rather than becoming an end in itself.
Precisely. He sees the potential for technology to solve many of the world's problems, but only if we approach it with the right mindset.
Okay.
We can't just blindly embrace every new gadget or platform.
Right.
We need to be critical discerning.
Yeah.
And always asking ourselves, how is this technology actually improving our lives?
That's a great question to keep in mind as we navigate this increasingly technological world.
For sure.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the mind of Peter Thiel, what are some key takeaways you hope our listener will walk away with?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that Thiel is a challenging thinker.
Yeah.
Who forces us to question our assumptions about everything.
Right.
From economics to education to the role of technology in society.
Yeah.
He's not always right, and his views can be provocative, even controversial.
For sure.
But he's always thought-provoking.
I agree.
And he pushes us to think beyond the conventional narratives.
Yeah.
And to consider alternative perspectives.
I think that's a great point. He's someone who makes you think, even if you don't always agree with him.
Absolutely.
And that's a valuable quality in a world that often seems to discourage independent thinking.
Couldn't agree more. He reminds us that we don't have to accept the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
We can challenge it, question it, and even try to change it.
And that's a powerful message.
Yeah.
So for our listener out there who's just been on this deep dive with us, what's one question you'd like to leave them with, to ponder as they continue to explore these ideas on their own?
I think the most important question to ask is this.
Okay.
What role do you want to play in shaping the future? Do you want to be a passive observer, or do you want to be an active participant, a builder, a creator, a disruptor?
Right.
Thiel believes we all have the potential to make a difference,
Yeah.
to leave our mark on the world. And he challenges us to embrace that potential,
Right.
to think big and to act boldly.
That's a fantastic challenge to leave our listener with.
I hope so.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground today. From the future of Silicon Valley to the collapse of liberalism to the role of skepticism in a healthy society.
Yeah, a lot of big ideas.
It's been a fascinating journey, and we hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep diving deep.